This is the Oracle Podcast with Ben Moa. All right, welcome back to the Oracle. I'm your host, Ben Amoa.
And I'm Kalmani Huther.
And it is the month of June. Can you believe that?
I mean, I can. I only believe it because I've been waiting for my paycheck. So.
Yikes. Well, it's been now 10 months since I've been in BC. I can't believe how fast time has flown by. It really just flies right by you. I never realized the side of working from the staff side at school. I think I took that for granted as a kid. So it was like, man, these teachers are chumps. I don't know why they look so exhausted. And it's crazy. But every meme about how the teaching year goes is super accurate.
Did you ever think you would be a teacher?
Well, I still don't consider myself a teacher. I think I'm very far from that. I don't have the skill.
What's your job description again?
I'm a chaplain
okay.
and a pastor. And so I don't consider myself a teacher whatsoever, but I see and I understand what gives them the grief that they have to face dealing with young people.
And June is also your birthday month.
That's right. My birthday's coming up soon, so stay tuned.
Age to not be revealed.
That's right. I'm a young old man. Please, you can see my Amazon wish list if you're thinking of any gifts. You can ask me in person, follow the page, whatever. I'll take any gift. But my birthday is coming up. June 28th is the birthday. So mark that on your calendars, mark it on your phones.
You don't need to do that. I need to mark
again,
it on my calendar.
Amazon wish list. Got the file on there.
List,
Yes, that's right. I'll give it to you. I have it on there. I think you have access to it already. All right, so this episode we have Kerhys Sterling. Kerhys Sterling was someone who I met at Oak Ridge Adventist Church when I was preaching there one Sabbath, and she was leading the Sabbath school class. And I knew that when I met her and she was sharing, I wanted her to feature on the episode. And in this episode, she talks about what it's like to be a Christian in the secular world.
Yeah, I mean, I find this subject really interesting because personally I have not lived necessarily in a secular world. My community that I grew up in is very Adventist based. I went to an Adventist elementary school, high school, and I'm now attending an Adventist university. And so the interactions in my life, all my part-time jobs have been within an Adventist institution. And so it's not that I've never talked to anyone that's not Adventist, but my day-to-day life is mainly focused around Adventist people. So just this perspective of being a Christian, no matter the denomination in a secular world, is really important. And I think it's not only interesting to me as a person that's grown up somewhat secluded, that like is a good take for anyone to listen to and understand how we can stand up and be different than the people around us.
That's right. So it's very important as Christians or as people that we know our identity and we know that how to relate to others with our identity. So hope you guys enjoy this show. Thank you again, Kerhys, for sharing your story. And I really pray that everyone takes something from this episode. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kerhys Sterling. I am 29 years old and I'm currently living in Vancouver, Canada. I moved here 3 years ago from England. I was living just outside of London and I moved with my work. Professionally, I am a quantity surveyor, which no one ever knows what that means. So pretty much I am a cost consultant for construction projects, and I look after construction budgets, not from an accounting perspective, but more from the, what is the actual cost of the bricks and seeing the steel and seeing the project through from conception right through to final account. That's what I do.
Okay, awesome. And you're from England originally, before
Yes.
Vancouver. And if anyone can't assume just from your accent, where in England are you from?
So I'm from a town called Aylesbury. It's in Buckinghamshire, which is northwest of London, maybe about an hour and 15 outside of the city.
And so, what brought you all the way from England to Canada?
Well, essentially it was with work. I specialize in gas stations and the construction of gas stations, and I always say it's through work, but really it was like a massive God moment in my life. I didn't want to move to Canada, and God just made the path so obvious. The door was wide open, and I find that God uses my career to move me where He needs me to be.
That's awesome. I think I love how sometimes when it's like a situation where you don't feel like you're supposed to do, or stuff that you inherently don't want to do at first, and you end up doing, like, that's the best. That's when God always does some amazing stuff.
Yeah, but it's super hard though, because I'm a mummy's girl at heart. I'm big into my family, and when God is opening a door for you, sometimes I fought Him. I'll be honest, I fought Him. I was like, you want me to go where, to do what? Canada wasn't anything that had ever really been on my radar, so it's been very exciting but terrifying also. But I feel that God sometimes moves you away from your comfort zone so that you have to rely wholeheartedly on Him, and He leads you to pastures new.
100%. 100%. And so, okay, that's already an amazing start, because you're already sharing about how you see God and how God is relevant to you. So how did you become a Christian? How did you become someone who believes in God?
Um, well, I was raised in a Christian home. I think in my early years, my mum would send me to church with my grandma. My mum was also raised in a Christian home, but she kind of stepped away from the church before I was born, and definitely in my early years. She wanted me to have this strong, moral foundation, and she wanted me to have the values. And so, I'd go with my grandma, and then as I got older, my mum, found her way back into community and sort of really rediscovered God for herself. And I think that's where my faith really started, because up until then, I'd kind of been going through the motions of just going to church with my grandma, and it was just something we did every week. But as my mum began exploring her faith, and, that came in waves, I started to see God through her eyes, and God became much more personable, because she was, the way she was searching for God was, her experience was that God wasn't kind, and He wasn't loving, and He doesn't do good to His children. And so as she was pursuing Him and really getting to the core of who Jesus was, and who He desired to be in her life, as a young sort of preteen by this time, I'm sort of watching her and hearing her speak of Him, and hearing her be encouraged by these different books she's reading. And so very early on, I had this very relational perspective of who Jesus Christ was, and of who He could be in my life.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so, it was incredible. And I think for many years, I, you go to church, you have your friends in church, and you love Jesus, and He's an important part of your life. But I think that for me, there was something missing. It's almost like you're cruising on just the routine of things. And, it's a whole nother different discussion to kind of get into my whole background and everything. But, there are a lot of things that happened within our family dynamic, where I kind of found myself having to grow up very quickly, and having to sort of step up in the role I played within my family. And so I think God increasingly became more real to me, because I found myself sort of crying out to Him and not really knowing what to say, other than like, just please help me. I don't know what to do. I'm just confused with certain things. And I think it came to one year, it had just been a really crazy year, and I was maybe 16 years old. And in the UK, at age 16, you have your first round of sort of formal exams. And I remember I'd been studying so hard and I was so overwhelmed by all these different subjects that I had to cram in. And while I enjoy learning, I am not one of those people who's naturally gifted. You meet those people who they don't have to do any studying and it just seems to come to them.
Mm-hmm.
That is not me. Like, I will have my head in the books. I'll be studying for hours, testing myself, writing notes, and I'll come out the other end and I'll get an okay-ish mark, and I'm sort of like, I'll take it, that's fine. And these exams are so important, and I was praying and I said, God, please just help me, just help me to remember. And I remember walking into the exam room and I turned the first page, and it was like that question was exactly what I'd been studying just before I walked into the exam room. And so I was just throwing down everything I could remember from studying that topic, around the question. And then I flipped to the next page and saw what the next question would be. And it was something that I had just been studying like the night before. And every single question on that paper, I had the answers to. And I was, in my heart, I just remember being like, God, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And, I wrote my exam and it all went well. And I remember walking out of it thinking, he really heard me. Like, he really heard me. He really cared about me enough that he cared about my exam. And it just sort of settled, there was just this peace that came within me that he really genuinely cared. And I began to pursue him. And I think one of the things many of us young people, especially when we're younger, we struggle with is we think that we have to reach a level of being good enough before, we can sort of declare our love for God publicly. And it took me another 2 years before I made the public decision of baptism, because I was looking at myself in the mirror and all I could see were all my imperfections and everything that was wrong. Here I am, I call myself a Christian, and God has come through for me in so many ways. Like, he's helping me in my personal family life with all the different things and situations that are going on. He's helping me with my education, but I'm still not getting it right all the time. I'm still this imperfect person, and I would become so frustrated with myself, and I would judge myself so heavily and feel as though others would be judging me too. And so I never spoke about how I wanted to publicly declare that I love Jesus and that I wanted to be his follower.
So,
and sorry, go on.
No, I was just wondering because, I guess now, bringing that forward to today, and it's like sometimes I think what brings us to God and to know God or to identify God is like we have these moments in our life where we're able to remember and recognize, and God was very clear, right? But how do we, or how do you even, how do you make or get yourself reminded of that to keep you going like every other day? Because I guess not every day you'll have like a big experience to help you recognize God. I think ideally we should, but it's difficult. How do you still trust that same God that was there for your big moment in your everyday life?
I think for me, it's not easy. I think it's a constant. I really think of my relationship with God as a relationship. It has its ups and downs. There are some days where it just feels really comfortable and it just feels really great to be talking to him and be in his presence. And then there are times when I feel as if I'm just yelling at him, like, you're supposed to love me. You're supposed to be looking out for my well-being. I think I struggle sometimes. And one of the things I do is I really believe in the importance of words and speaking into myself, and not just relying on the encouragement of others, but really sort of harnessing scripture to speak how God feels towards me into my life. So, I tell myself, Kerhys, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He's never going to leave you or forsake you. And, I speak these words, and, I really verbalize what I think and feel with God. I don't hide from him. Some people, I guess, would maybe think I'm a little crazy, but like if I'm mad at God, I tell him I'm mad at him, and I tell him exactly why. And, I'm a very visual person in my learning and how I relate. I have very active imagination. So I literally visualize myself sat sulking in a corner with God looking at me and sort of like his arms stretched wide and like, come here, Kerhys. And I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to you right now. You hurt my feelings. And so between this sort of like visualization of my relationship with God, it helps me to draw nearer to him, especially when I'm having my human moments. When I'm going through days and, maybe I've been a little curt with someone in the store, because I was frustrated or just having a bad moment. I remember when I was living at home, if I was short with my brother, I would have to I have these imperfect moments, and it's not that I trivialize them or sort of give myself pass, but I also embrace my humanity because I believe that God recognizes that I am an imperfect human being. And I consistently tell myself, don't stop trying to mirror the image of your father, Kerhys, but also know that he understands that you're trying. And even when you feel it's not good enough, he says it is.
Wow.
Right, that's a very long-winded way
that's very
about
powerful.
it. It's so hard to, explain what happens in your head during the day, right? But I really do focus on my relationship with God, and I focus on his humanity. He came into human form. He gets it. He knows those moments where you really want to just side-eye someone because did you really just say that to me? Did you just send me this email? And I have to check myself, and I'll be like, God, why am I like this? I know better than this. I know who the person I'm meant to be, and I'll ask him to change me. And I keep doing to be a better version of myself. But I'm trying to teach myself that when I fail and when I mess up, not to whip myself every time, not to use that to put distance between me and God, but rather use it to draw closer.
Wow, that's inspiring. Well, yeah, that actually needed that. I needed that. That kind of leads me to another question I have for you because kind of what you're talking about, I think sometimes maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I think as Christians, when we work in Christian environments, it can leave us to be kind of complacent in seeing that need of God in every interaction. Because we're in like a God, I guess, quotation marks, godly place or a place that is owned by God. It kind of like lessens our realization of the need of God. That makes sense. Like that yearning. And so I think that kind of happens. And, I think I don't even know because I went to public school my whole life, and then I started going to it, but being part of Adventist school, and now I work for the Adventist school. I'm a chaplain there, and I can see how it's easy to become complacent it's very easy to, because like, we're pretty blessed because we start off the day with a worship, right?
Yeah.
When you go to your class, or if you teach a class, you're probably going to do a worship in the morning. And then, there's a chapel that day. And then, and then maybe the weekend. So you're always surrounded by like these like constant religious events or these spiritual events, these worship events, and so, you don't necessarily have to worry or in your mind think about how much, oh man, like I'm not getting enough God in a way, or I need to reach out to God. I don't think this is like a common, like maybe it's not as big of an issue, but I can see how it could be easy to become pretty comfortable. But for you work in a job that necessarily isn't like an Adventist school or a church, right? How do you experience Christ, or even share that Christ to people, or how do you live and identify as a Christian when you're at work, where it's not like a church or it's not a Christian school? How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I guess it kind of starts off with perspective, and just sort of like to take it back a little before I can sort of fully answer the question. Other than going to church once a week, I was never surrounded by Christians or Adventists. My entire education, my entire work life, all my peers have always been outside of church. So for me, it's a very comfortable space to navigate because it's all I've ever known. However, one thing I've learned to do is that it gives me new perspective, because not everyone, we all go to different schools, we're all raised in different ways, we work in different places, and it affects how we navigate the world and how we see other people. And I was thinking about it the other week, and I think in some ways when you know Jesus Christ, you almost have, in the world right now, you've got sort of there's a lot of talk around privilege in many different ways, right? Mm-hmm. So let's put that to the church. When you know Jesus, you kind of have Jesus privilege, right? Because you have the experience of a relationship with him. There's more. It's not to say that everything is easy. It's not saying that life is all perfect and peachy. I think that there are a lot more similarities, between Christians and non-Christians than sometimes we realize. But I think to know Jesus Christ is such a privilege, because there's this comfort of just not going through life alone. And so when you then go out into the rest of the world, it's navigating that world with the knowledge that the way you see things, the way you experience things will sometimes just be a little different to the average person, because you know Jesus. So when I came into the workplace, I had worked as a waitress while I was studying, and I'd met lots of different very interesting people. And the first thing that really stood out to me is that these people were just regular people having very regular lives. And when I was talking about my life, I was the odd one. And it kind of took me aback a little at first, because people sort of like, so what are you doing at the weekends? And I'll be like, oh, I'm going to church. They're being like, oh, but, that's just a couple hours on Sunday. Like, what are you doing the rest of the weekend? And I'd be like, no. I go to church firstly on a Saturday. It's like, why? Because, it was new for people, the concept of going to church on a Saturday, right? And then, people were sort of like, well, what do you mean it's more than a couple hours? And it's like, well, you have like a small group discussions early in the morning, and then you have your main service and a sermon, and then maybe you'll have plans with friends or family in the afternoon. And the whole concept was incredibly odd. And the first thing I learned was that I had to adapt to the language I was using. Sabbath doesn't mean anything to people who don't understand it. It's just a word that they're not familiar with. Sabbath school, Sunday school, these are sort of things that people would look at me as if to say, like, what is she talking about? And so I learned really quickly that I had to learn how to share what I was doing in a way that made sense to them. So I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to church. I go on a Saturday, but it's awesome. I get there early because, we kind of have like a small group discussion. It's just, community. We can share how our week's going on, and we can just discuss life topics and have an opportunity just to, share different thoughts and opinions together. Now that's a much easier way to describe a Sabbath school, right? Than saying, oh, we come together in a room and we have this lesson book that we follow through. Because, so one thing I had to really recognize was the language I was using to be relatable. And, as I progressed and I finished my studies and I entered a more formal work setting, one thing I found is that there are a lot of Christians in this world. It's just not everyone lives their Christianity in a loud way. Do you know what I mean? You'll pick up on subtle differences in people, and you'll start having conversations, and you'll kind of pick out little by little, that people have a faith or they have history, within their family. And it really opened my eyes to the humanity of people, because I remember being in school and every now and then, if I did something wrong, someone would always turn around and be like, aren't you meant to be a Christian? And oh man, it would really get me and really just make it difficult, because it was almost as if your imperfections are just being called out all the time. Whereas the older I got and the more I just met people where they were, just have a conversation, recognizing the time and place to share Jesus Christ. I can't walk around my office talking about Jesus and evangelizing, all the time. And in many ways, that's not my personality. I am all about relationships. And what I've come to realize through knowing Jesus Christ is that when I'm going through something difficult, and I know I touched on earlier, we're just human beings. We have tough seasons of life where it feels that everything is against us and we're just really weathering the storm, and we're there and we're like, God, how am I going to get through this? What are you doing? People who don't know Jesus Christ are going through the exact same thing, but they don't know who to cry out to. There is not that same sense of hope or calm within the storm that those of us who know God can try and harness onto, because they don't know him. And so it's really opened up my heart to really just see people, not just outside of Christianity or outside of, faith as a whole, but just everyone, to see people as feeling, emotive human beings who are getting it right, who are getting it wrong, who are having great times, who are having tough times. And everyone, whether they are doing it as a Christian or just as your average person, they're just trying to lead a decent life, And that has really grown my empathy.
Wow. So what would you say to someone who is working outside of a Christian or Adventist circle, because I think I mean, I struggled like this when I was in public school, and I can only imagine. I thank God all the time that I've been given this opportunity to work amongst, I guess, Christians without having to
Hmm.
have this battle. But I've always wondered, and like since you've experienced it, I mean, and it seems like you've been able to get a hand on it, which is very powerful. Um, what would you tell somebody who doesn't know necessarily how to live in a secular world as a Christian once church is over, or once
Yeah.
the Sabbath is over, or once, like that potluck is done? Like, how would you tell somebody?
I guess the first thing I would say is be who you are. Be true to who you are. God has uniquely created you for a purpose. He has created you with gifts and ways of thinking and ways of speaking that not everyone else can do. So as you navigate, you know, a world where there maybe aren't as many Christians around you, be confident in who you are. That is the first step. Know who you are, know how Jesus Christ feels about you, his love towards you, his tenderness towards you. Next thing I would say is learn not to be surprised. You know, I remember talking to one friend, and I remember him saying to me, like, there's just so much bad language, and someone said something, and I was trying to sort of understand. And what I came to realize is, for me, I've always been in, you know, public schools and public environments. So hearing certain things and ways of thinking, not to say it doesn't shock me sometimes,
Mm,
but I'm much more adjusted to it in the sense that this is very normal every day. Certain things you'll hear and see, right? That's normal within a world setting, but it's very abnormal if you put that in a Christian setting. So one thing to be aware of is there are going to be things you hear and you see, and it's not that the world is this terrible, terrible place. It's just this is their normal, and you're entering someone else's normal, right? And you have to learn how to navigate it, and you've got to learn what are your boundaries and what you're not comfortable with, and where it's sort of like, maybe, I'm not comfortable discussing this, or I don't speak in this way, but also recognizing that as you enter this, especially in the workplace where it's going to be high stress and very intense, it's not always going to be soft and gentle. People can be hard sometimes because there's not this atmosphere of looking out for everyone. It's very look out for yourself sometimes. So it's learning not to be so surprised or so shaken by certain things, because that is very normal in that space. It's just maybe abnormal to an individual because it's a new setting. And that's, I guess, where you really have to sort of like lean on your friends and support systems, contact someone who maybe has been in the work setting a little longer, who can give you tips and advice as to, how to navigate that space. And then the only thing after I would say is, other than being yourself and just learning not to be so sort of like surprised or to sort of retreat because things are unfamiliar, I would say meet people where they are. When Jesus asked us to be his hands and feet to go into the world, and one of the most beautiful things that Jesus did for humanity is he met them exactly where they were. So when you're navigating the workspace, just go and do the same thing. Get to know people. Be interested in your colleagues and want to get to know them. And if you're being authentically yourself and you're just saying, if you go to a midweek Bible study you know, and your colleagues ask you where you're going, tell them this is what I'm doing. And if they have questions, share more. And if they don't, it's okay, because there will be another opportunity, because you're seeing them 5 days a week, you know? And let individuals see the Jesus in you. Because if you are being authentically who Christ has called you to be, even on your imperfect days, like, oh my goodness, I have my bad days, right? It's construction, so I work in a very intense environment, and I get into that office and the energy is just, it's intense. Like, you can feel the emotions and the stress in the air the minute you walk into the office. And one thing I've come to realize is my personality at heart, I'm a bit of a prankster. I like to cause mischief. I like to be silly and have fun. And I've recognized that that is how I reach my friends in the workplace. You know, I recognize the intensity of the environment we're working in. And so my role, as I see it, is to bring joy into that workplace. They are my family from the minute I step in to the minute I leave. You know, I care about how they're doing. You know, I have a very discerning sort of spirit within me. So, you know, I can look at someone, and if I sense something's not okay, you know, I'll just, you know, I'll go and buy them a chocolate bar or some sweeties from downstairs. You know, we have a little grocery store, and kind of leave it on their desk, or I'll drop them a little message or throw a paper ball at them. You know, wherever you are, whatever space God has put you in, especially if you're in a space where you are not surrounded by Christians, I really just encourage individuals to identify what this space needs. Do they need hope? Do they need a little bit of happiness? Do they need, you know, honesty and reliability? Whatever is needed in that space, then how are you going to meet that need? And how are you going to present it in a way that is clearly understood and is non-threatening? Okay, because depending on your workspace, you know, you can't necessarily talk about Jesus. You can't have an open witness, and so your life becomes the witness. But also, people, especially as we get a little older, you know, and it's not to talk down on younger generations at all, but that sort of judgment of, well, aren't you meant to be a Christian? It kind of subsides a little, because we're all people and everyone is just trying. You know, everyone is just trying their best to lead a good life. And that includes us as Christians. You know, yeah, sometimes we're going to get it wrong. You know, I have had bad days where I've yelled at a contractor down the phone and slammed the phone down, and everyone's looking at me and sort of like, Kerhys, what just happened? And I'll be like, oh man. I'll be like, I'm sorry guys, you know, bad moment, you know, and I'll be like, God, oh man. I meant to be getting it right, but I'm still a human being too. You know, I'm still a human being too. And God is just like, I feel him cheering me on. He's like, okay, Kerhys, got to make another phone call now, but let's try not to yell at these ones, even if they deserve it. You know, just let's start again. And so I just say, enjoy getting to know people. Enjoy getting to see people in a different light. Open your heart to empathy, to really just see the core of humanity. Especially if you're, you know, for individuals maybe who you have gone to a Christian school and you've stepped out of a Christian university and you're looking for work, it's going to be different. It is going to be different, but it's also such a beautiful experience, because you really get to see people, just you begin to glimpse how God sees us and how he sees humanity. You know?
that's it for another episode of the Oracle. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope this episode was a blessing to you and you were able to connect with the story of Kerhys Sterling. We're going to be doing a giveaway for the Oracle. We'll be giving out t-shirts for the first 10 people who message us and tell us their favorite episode, and that can give us just something that we can work on, anything, any advice or something that you're looking for, any suggestion of someone else we can interview. So all you need to do is inbox the Facebook account, message the Facebook, message on Instagram. You can leave a review. Just let us know something that we can do to increase the Oracle experience, and you'll be part of our giveaway that we'll be giving out an Oracle t-shirt. So thank you so much for all those who are tuning in. Love you all and stay blessed.